All right. So good afternoon, everybody. We've got some people arriving still, so we'll keep people letting people in as we go. But I think we'll kick off. How's it going, Richard? You're in the glass house there. I can see, looking
I
very
am. It feels very much like I'm in the Mediterranean here, which is nice.
yeah. The weather has been complete and utter pants, hasn't it? For the last it's just been one of the worst Octobers I think I can ever remember.
Uh, a dreadful year all the way through, actually, one of those forgettable years for weather, but there's still plenty coming off the garden. You have your trials and tribulations as the year goes through, but managing and the garden is getting more resilient all the time with all the organic matter I'm getting into the soil and improving drainage. So it's not easy, but we're keeping going.
Yeah. Um, I'm quite happy to kind of just wallow in the crapness of the weather for a minute, but you went very quickly to a positive slant on it there, which is not like you.
I went through quickly through what, sorry?
You went to a very positive slant on the whole weather situation very quickly there. I was kind of going to wallow for a couple of minutes in how crap it's been at home.
Um, I think it's more that obviously with your executive role, Mick, you're not out as much as I am. It's been so difficult this year. You have to keep your head up, and
Yeah.
um, I can't allow. Maybe when I take my break at Christmas, I'll wallow for a while, but can't afford to at the moment. I've got to keep
Yeah.
getting crops out.
Fair enough. So your point is that in my job I have plenty of time to wallow and you don't have any in yours.
Well, you paid for it, aren't you? Wallowing, and I mean, you have so many meetings. I don't know how you ever get round to work, to be honest. But
That's very true. But tell me, how is the garden in general? Because there has been a serious amount of rainfall. Like, is it sort of sodden or is it holding up a little bit?
well, to state the totally obvious, it's very wet everywhere, even the free draining areas. But most crops are holding up without rotting, and I think that's largely due to having worked on the soil over the years, really. And I managed to sow my broad beans earlier in the week. Uh, in a gap between rainstorms, and I got a bit muddy, but they went in, and things are working. So, yes, it's difficult, but I've not really lost any crops yet because of the weather. Though some of them are looking a little bit yellow now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So in this month's we are going to be talking about two separate things, both very timely. I think we're going to talk about garlic as our veg of the month. And we're going to be talking about crop rotation. And we've got plenty of questions in already, which I have up here on the screen. So we'll kind of talk through some of them. And if you're in the webinar live, you can also put up any questions you have in the chat, and we'll try and get to them as well. So I think we'll kick off, Richard, with do you want to talk crop rotation or garlic first? Because I think if we're going to
Uh,
talk garlic, I
well, I
should
know
tell
you
my
like
garlic
talking
story.
about mix, so let's get like talking about garlic, don't you, mix? So we'll get in the crop rotation first, and then we can fill up the rest of the session with your garlic story. Um, so yeah, rotations.
Yeah.
I
So
really like the
what
strip.
what the, what is it first of all? Talk to us about it
Sorry,
because it
yes, a
it sounds
rotation.
sounds like a very sort of horticultural term, crop rotation. So maybe just explain what it's for first of all.
Absolutely, it's you with most crops, you shouldn't grow them in the same bit of land every year, year after year, because there's soil-borne pests and diseases that attack that particular crop will get worse and worse every year. And the classic ones would be eelworms. They're tiny little nematode worms that attack potatoes. The clubroot that attacks cabbages, white rot that attacks onions, garlic, leeks. All of these will build up if you grow them for more than 1 year. So what's really important is, say you grow potatoes in one area of your garden 1 year, you leave as long as possible to get potatoes back there again. And that's it. It gets, in gardening books, it gets bizarrely complicated. Like you should put leaves after roots, after whatever. That's, to use a non-horticultural term, complete crap. It's basically all you are doing is keeping plants that are susceptible to a particular disease apart for as long as possible. So the minimum you can really get away with is 3 years. So if you put potatoes in a piece of ground this year, then you should have 2 full growing seasons at least before you put potatoes back in there again. And ideally more than that. And the standard rotation you use in a veg patch is 4 years, but 5, 6, 7 is even better. So all that means really, if you're starting a garden off, you shouldn't have more than ideally a quarter in any one type of plant. So that's a quarter of the garden in potatoes, a quarter in the cabbage family, no more than that, and no more than a quarter in the onion, leek, garlic family. And that really sums up rotations, to be honest. There's a few other, from my perspective, there might be the need, say, to have an early sown crop. So I wouldn't want a crop like kale to precede it, where I've been walking on the soil harvesting kale through the winter. You might need a month or two to get that ground ready for sowing. So there's a few other little things like that, but the main thing is keeping plant families apart. And some crops, I know we had 1 or 2 questions on this, for more perennial crops, crops that would, if you let them, or allowed them grow for a couple of years, like tomatoes or runner beans, can actually be fine, even quite happy, grown year after year. And I've trialed tomatoes in the same tunnel year after year, and they're fine as long as you get very large amounts of compost in, organic matter, dung or compost, because what you're doing is you will be increasing the amount of potential infection from the bad fungi, like Fusarium, Verticillium. These are things that attack tomatoes, but you're increasing the number of the positive fungi called mycorrhizal fungi that live in the roots, as long as you have lots of organic matter in the soil. So you have this arms race where you're getting more healthy bacteria and more unhealthy fungi bacteria as well. And you can keep that going indefinitely. And my late father in the 1950s spent some of his youth digging soil out of glass houses before the days of mini diggers and things, because that was the period they switched from fertility coming in from the back end of an animal to fertility coming in a bag. And that's when the soil-borne diseases went crazy in tomatoes. They couldn't grow continuous tomatoes anymore. They didn't quite know why at the time. So tomatoes, runner beans, a few other perennial crops you can grow continually as long as you keep the soil healthy.
Okay, so let's give a couple of practical examples. So if you had 3 raised beds in your back garden, say, for example, or 3, if you're going direct in the soil, 3 areas, say, that you could divide it into, what would be a crop rotation to use in that case?
Well, very much depends on what you want to grow. And I would,
let's say you want to grow a bit of everything.
Okay, well, the things you're likely to want to grow a lot of for a traditional household, first of all, the cabbage family, because that includes things like rocket, mizuna, mustard that you're growing for salads as well. So I would have ideally a quarter, but if you just want a 3-year rotation, no more than a third of cabbage, cauliflower, kale, rocket, mizuna, mustard. They're all the cabbage family.
Yeah. Also called brassicas, in case anybody is wondering about that. So yeah, that's fine. So that's a third or a little more if you wanted.
Not a little more, a little less, ideally.
A little less. Sorry.
Yeah. And then potatoes. Most people want to grow, a traditional family want to grow potatoes, no more than a third or a quarter in potatoes. And then these are the big ones to keep apart. Then the rest would be in the leek and onion family. So that would be garlic, leeks, onions, scallions. the ideal would be divided into 4, and I would have each of those and then everything else. So you could have peas and beans and beetroot or whatever. But it really depends on what you want to grow. And know your plant families and keep them apart for as long as possible. That's all there is to rotation.
Yeah, and the one I use, and I know there was a question asked about this one specifically from Hermione, I think, is a 5. So I have 10 raised beds at home, and I've got I have a 5, like, so I have 2 beds in each rotation and a 5-year rotation, and it's basically the famous kind of mnemonic that we've written about before. To remember it is people love bunches of roses, so it's potatoes, legumes, brassicas, onions, and roots. And I know there's sometimes a little bit of kind of uncertainty over what constitutes a root, but from my perspective, I put in carrots, parsnips, and beetroot into that. I know sometimes you don't put beetroot in your root rotation, do you? Or you do actually? Do
Well,
you?
I wouldn't use those divisions, as I say, because roots, a turnip or a radish is a root, but they're brassicas. They go in that part of the rotation. So I actually think that is confusing to tell people plant parts, because it purely is the plant family susceptibility diseases.
Yeah. Okay.
For instance, when I worked in East Africa for rotations, tomatoes were grown outside, and they obviously went in the same area as the potatoes.
Yeah.
So it's what your part you eat, which it's not the part you eat, it's the plant family that's important.
Yeah. And I think the main message that we're trying to get across here probably is don't stress too much about what you put in each rotation. It's really about grouping them together in the main families and moving everything around. If you
Yes,
follow
that's
that
it.
core principle, you can't go too far wrong. So, for example, Hermione has asked about in that rotation of potatoes, legumes, brassicas, onions, roots, is it okay to sow potatoes after onions, thereby
Whenever
skipping
you want.
roots? Yeah, exactly.
Although there's a few other factors you might consider. So I really think people need to sort of drop the idea of what follows what, but make up their own one. For instance, I would never put onions after potatoes, because onions are a close sown crop and don't like being disturbed. And with the best will in the world, it's very hard to dig all your potatoes out of the ground. So you'll get these vigorous potato shoots emerging and getting in the way of your onion crop. So I would always put a crop. Well, what I do here, I grow the brassicas after potatoes the year after, because they're wide apart, your cauliflowers, your kale, your cabbage, and I can chop around with a hoe, and the potatoes that are trying to emerge from self-sown potatoes, I can just chop out. Whereas if I had them growing through carrots or onions, there'd be a pain, to get them out. So there's factors like that you could consider, but as I say, that's just you build up your knowledge as you're developing your gardening skills, really, and you decide what you do and don't like to grow after different crops.
I wrote about this recently, actually, in a blog about I always feel like there's a pivot in the year when you sort of start really thinking about next year. Certainly for me, as a sort of more occasional gardener than you are, Richard, and it's when I have to consult the I've a kind of a notebook inside the house where I have a map of my crop rotation, and once a year I generally have to kind of look at it and decide where I'm going to put things next year, particularly when I'm kind of thinking about, like, this time of the year, where am I going to put the garlic? And so I'm sort of figuring out that. And it is that sort of time of the year when you start thinking about next year, I think, a lot more.
Yes.
So I think we've addressed Hermione's question. Connor asked about the best way of managing crop rotation with raised beds. He doesn't say how many raised beds he has. Presumably, if you only had one, for example, would a crop rotation be a bit of a nonsense in that situation? Because presumably the pests can travel anywhere in the bed they want, basically.
I think, they would tend to. And soil, for instance, if you have some white rot on your onions, it'll fall off somewhere else. In that, mix and match it and try and move them around a bit. Don't be quite so formal. And do a little bit of intercropping and things. Try and manage it that way.
Yeah. Okay. So Finian says, Crop rotation is very important to reduce the occurrence of disease. My greatest problem is the control of slugs. Have you any sure way of doing this without having to use chemicals? So that's not really a crop rotation question, actually.
No, crop rotation is very important, but there's a very limited number of pests and diseases it controls. They have to be soil-borne and not move very much. So that's slugs are quite immobile. I read one scientific paper that said slugs could move a kilometre in a week, but they don't. But they clearly crop rotation would have to be on a very large scale to control slugs.
Okay. And somebody asked about, Lorraine asked about tomatoes in a crop rotation. So you've covered that. I think that
I think you can very successfully grow tomatoes in the same spot every year as long as you're adding an awful lot of organic matter to the soil to keep the soil healthy.
Yeah. Okay. And then what to plant in your onion and garlic bed the following year. So I suppose that's from Gareth. I guess it would depend on what rotation that you're using, with your point then about maybe not putting onion and garlic where your potatoes were the previous year.
I think that's, it's very handy. And garlic is overwintered, so you want the beds. For instance, my garlic is going in after early beetroot came out in the beds there, purely because that's a timing issue. I've had time to get the beds ready. They're already sitting there very wet, waiting for me to plant the garlic. No particular rush on it. With the onions, you want to they go in quite early, so you need to be able to prepare the ground fairly early for those as well. So you wouldn't want an overwintered crop, really, like kale or Savoy cabbage or Brussels sprouts to go in, because you wouldn't be able to really prepare the ground very easily for an early planting of onions.
Yeah. Okay. I put up that mnemonic in the chat there for people if you're interested. So that's a 5-year rotation based, and you group things like that. And I really just use that because it's easy to remember. Richard, just before we move off, you were saying there about the question of following vegetables with particular vegetables. So the classic kind of one you hear about, and I just love to hear your thoughts. Is this a myth that you would follow the like brassicas, leafy crops that like that sort of nitrogen, put them in where you had your legumes last year? This idea that the legumes leave nitrogen in the soil, that the brassicas would benefit from the following year. Is that a complete myth, or is there any truth in that?
A very limited amount of truth. It's you probably know I did my research on it a number of years ago on nitrogen fixation and legumes and so on. This comes from a gardener's misunderstanding of agricultural practice, where you very much use things like clover, which are legumes, to get nitrogen in the soil. For then, organic vegetable growers will do this, and then you grow a high nitrogen demanding crop like cabbages or something afterwards. In a back garden, you're adding fertilizer, compost, manures anyway, so it's irrelevant. And also the peas and beans leave very, very little nitrogen for a subsequent crop, nothing significant. They produce enough for their own, so you didn't put nitrogen fertilizer down for peas or beans. They'll fix their own nitrogen for that. But when you harvest the crop, that's where your nitrogen's going in, the high protein peas and beans. So there's nothing significant left for subsequent crops. So
would it be fair? Would it be fair to say, though, in that case, if they can fix their own nitrogen, that they have a low nitrogen demand on the soil?
Oh, very much. You wouldn't give peas and beans nitrogen fertilizer.
Right. So that might suggest then that it's still a good idea to follow with brassicas, because you wouldn't have to add a whole load of nitrogen to the soil.
Well, you would.
You would anyway?
The peas and beans will have fixed some nitrogen, but virtually everything they've fixed has gone into making peas and beans, and there's nothing significant left for a high demanding crop like brassicas afterwards. So you just have to fertilize for the next crop as normal.
Okay, so basically, if you've read that in your in your gardening books, including in mine, it's a complete and utter load of crap. So that's good that we've cleared
That
that
would be
up.
my analysis. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the main thing is not to worry about the order in which the veg are in the rotation. Just do a rotation. That's our summary. All right. So let's move on. We're going to talk about garlic, and we do have some questions about that. But maybe in general, tell us like this. This is a good time of the year. Normally, I'd have mine sown by now, but I do listen to you occasionally, and I know you said last month leave it until the
I've
end of
never said that
October.
before, Mick.
I know, yeah. Well, this is the first time for everything, and so I'm going to sow it this weekend. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
yes. When I've done trials, I've started in the beginning of October and going right into December with autumn sown garlic.
Yeah,
I found that the very earliest ones weren't as vigorous going through the winter, and the sweet spot seems to be late October through to late November. To get the healthiest, most vigorous ones. I mean, that was only 1 year. Another year could be slightly different, but certainly there
yeah.
seemed to be no yield reduction going well into November. So
So
I've not got my beds are ready, but it's so wet. They've been quite miserable getting them in. It looks like we could have a dryish few days, so I'll probably put some in next week. I'll see.
so what's going on there though? Because like I would have thought, like certainly the logic I've used in my head is that if you get them into the ground in October, they have a chance to sort of get established before the real heavy winter comes in, and then they kind of go dormant for a while, and then they're sort of
In
kick in again in the
in
spring.
my
But is
experience, they if you put them in too early, particularly in wetter weather, they get more fungal disease,
okay.
which is less of a problem when the temperatures cool down a bit. So I think get them into the soil when it's cooled a little bit. If it's too warm, I do think they're more susceptible to fungal disease, which is my analysis of why they weren't doing as well.
Yeah.
So they get a little bit ahead of themselves and get fungal attack. But that was only 1 year, and another year might find different. But certainly on the other, the positive way of looking at it, I've seen no yield reduction going up to the end of November.
So what you're saying is it wasn't a very well conducted piece of research.
If you're fun before it, Mick, I'll happily do it. I know your love of garlic.
Okay, so broadly speaking, if you've never sown garlic before, what we're doing is taking a bulb of garlic, taking the individual cloves of it, sticking them down
Yeah,
into the
can we
soil.
emphasize that? Because I had a volunteer once come into the garden who was planting whole bulbs of garlic.
Mm.
So you break quite seriously. I'm not being rude about the person, but it's an easy mistake to make. Break it up carefully into individual cloves.
Okay. Uh, Break it up into the individual cloves, which then are planted in the soil with the sort of ridge side facing down, tip side facing up, and you're burying them under the ground by about like an inch. Is that about right?
Yeah, I tend to have loose soil, which makes it easier for keeping it, getting it a little bit dry early on in the year.
Yeah.
And yeah, push it into the depth of my thumb, really. It's your inch or so, you're 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters in.
Yeah.
And
So
I would
sorry, the tip of it is down to
underground, yeah, I would very strongly recommend covering it. Because our very inquisitive rooks here, we have a lovely rookery on the edge of the garden, which great, but they're very inquisitive birds, and I've had them pull every single one up before now. So it's a good idea to cover them over with some sort of net,
yeah.
some rooks and crows pulling them up.
And definitely go back every week or so and check that they're still there because you do get sort of is frost heave a thing again, or is that a myth that I know we're not getting many frosts yet, but that kind of
Well, frost
contraction
heave
and
certainly
expansion of the
works.
soil would
Yeah.
push them out.
Yeah, if you live in a more inland area than here, you could get serious frost. So I
Okay.
think my feeling is we're in for a hard winter this year anyway, so we might have it here. It can happen, yeah. Check them if there's been hard frost and push them back in again. Occasionally people say, should they put them in a tunnel or should they transplant
Yeah.
start them in a tunnel, put them out? They're actually a crop that loves the cold weather. they need a shot of cold to get them to produce a load more cloves, the standard
Yeah.
bulb of garlic. So they have to go through the winter cold. And back 12 years ago now, when we had an extremely hard winter, the snow came in the end of November, beginning of December, and stayed down for a long time. I kind of thought my garlic would be gone because most crops were, things like Savoy cabbage were destroyed in the field. And I saw the snow melting and little shoots popping straight through. The garlic was growing quite happily, not a single loss. So they don't mind cold weather at all. They're one of the most frost hardy of all crops.
Okay. And would they do worse in a tunnel?
I think they probably would, and it's a total
Yeah.
waste of valuable tunnel space.
How does it work then that Spain is such a big garlic exporter if their climate would be so much warmer than ours?
Well, ever been inland in Spain, they have serious winters, inland if they're growing there. But
Okay.
there'll be varieties adapted to different climates. That's why if you're putting garlic in, buy planting garlic or get garlic from another gardener or grower, because we obviously grow varieties suited to the North European climate.
Yeah.
If you get it from a supermarket, it could be garlic from China or Spain, and that'll be varieties which are suitable for their climate.
Yeah.
Which might not grow at all well in Irish climate. So buy proper planting garlic.
Yeah. Okay. A couple of questions here about garlic then. Mary asked us, do we need garlic to apply fertilizer before sowing? So like would you put in some, poultry manure pellets or seaweed dust, something like that?
Right.
Depends on
Now,
your
just
conditions of
first
your
of all,
soil, I
talking
guess.
about our own experience here, all our fertility is from our own compost now. I don't buy fertilizer. And I would give all the beds, which is slow release nitrogen, all the beds for garlic would have had compost put in late September, early October.
Right.
If you don't have compost, then a little bit of seaweed could be good.
Fresh
You need to
seaweed,
have
you
good
mean?
bait, but I wouldn't use the poultry manure pellets because you really don't want to have too much nitrogen. What I would tend to do if you feel your soil is pretty fertile, just put them in and then top dress next February and hoe it into the soil and
Top
get washed
dress
in then,
with
and that will give them a boost.
compost.
Sorry?
Top dress with compost.
No, that would be if you're using poultry manure pellets or other
Oh, okay.
fertilizer. But if you're using compost, put a little bit in before you plant them.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody asked, Polly asked the difference between hard and soft neck garlic. That's a great question because I don't think I would know if you had them in front of me. What is the difference?
It's whether they have whether they're completely covered in the bulb essentially. All the varieties I'm trying to remember which way around it is now. They're all the covered ones, which are hard neck, I assume, but I might have got that the wrong way around. It's not something I bother particularly with because I just buy the same couple of varieties every year, which are
Yeah.
the standard type. I'm trying to remember which way around this is now. The standard type is the bulb which is completely covered with scales,
Yeah.
and that's the one I grow. And I think, oh, so I'm having to pass on that, which is not something I remember, to be honest.
All right, we might have to come back to that, to Polly, on that question then. So she asked something that is an issue for me pretty much every year, which is rust on garlic. And I know it doesn't necessarily affect your yield, but it looks very unsightly. Is there any way to prevent it?
Not really. With our organic garden here, I have it every year. Yes, you can prevent it using fungicide, but that's not what we do here or that we recommend particularly. You probably keep fungal diseases at bay a little bit by not over fertilizing with nitrogen. So that's my argument for not putting down a general fertilizer as you put them in, wait till the spring when they're growing vigorously. But It's more a perception thing. They'll get it, they grow through it. I produce crate loads for the kitchen every early summer here, and they have a bit of rust on them. You know, it's if you're managing a garden and trying not to do too much harm to the environment, you'll have a few
Just
spots on the leaves.
leave it
Really,
alone. Yeah.
yeah.
And what causes it, Richard? Is it
It's a fungus
wetness?
disease.
It's a fungus. So is
And
it?
it seems to attack them every year. A damp year seems to be worse than a dry year, but a dry winter in Ireland is a fairly rare thing. So they will get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Okay. Um. So yes, and I get that, Polly, on my garlic every year at home, and it doesn't seem to affect the yield too much. I think what affected size of the bulbs this year maybe was that dry spell we had in, when was it, Richard? April and May, or was it May and early June?
Yeah, as you know, harvest all of my garlic green here for Chef,
Yeah, I know.
because he uses leaves and everything and stems, so
Yeah,
everything's
I'm
pulled
not.
out of the garden.
I don't want to do that at home though, because it's valuable to me as a storage crop that I have garlic for the
Mm,
winter. I don't want to eat
yeah.
it green like.
No, for me, it's again because we're very intensive production here. I pull it
Yeah,
out in April, May, and then I get a crop of French beans in straight afterwards.
yeah.
Whereas if you leave until July to dry off, then you can't really get a crop in afterwards.
So do you think that dry spell in May and early June would have affected the size of the bulbs? Because they would need moisture at that stage
Yes,
to
it
bulk
would at
out,
that
wouldn't they?
phase. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I think that's all the garlic questions we have there. Some other random ones then. There's two questions around what to grow in a polytunnel for the winter. I mean, I guess we're up against it in terms of being able to sow in a tunnel, but possibly
No,
still
still
okay.
just time.
Yeah,
Um, you, we use our tunnels here for winter salads,
yeah,
and you can sow winter salads up to the end of October. This is the brassica salads. You could
yeah,
sow corn salad or winter purslane a little bit later, actually. So if you get moving this week, you can get Mizuna and mustard are the two ones that do really well. Rocket less well over the winter.
yeah.
Though I grow a little bit of it, but it often doesn't do brilliantly.
Okay.
And then I have two tunnels here. For the second tunnel, I wait until mid-January, and then sow salads again. Well, sorry, that's now empty. The tomatoes have come out because all of the salads you sow to the end of October bolt in February, March.
Yeah,
So the ones you sow in January, that takes us through March into April, the salads for the kitchen. So that's one crop. Another very useful crop in a tunnel is early potatoes. And that requires a little bit of effort, but it's well worth it. I used to sell it as a commercial crop, and I would always have early potatoes on the market for sale, at the last market in April,
yeah,
growing in the tunnel. And you plant those around about Christmas time. You can work up your Christmas pudding on Stephen's Day and drop them in, but you need to buy your seed potatoes. Various places will sell them. I think Mr. Middleton probably sells early ones. Fruit Hill Farm always has them. They'll have a batch which they've been kept at the right temperature, so they're ready to sprout in December. You can keep a few of your own and keep them quite warm through the autumn. By warm, I mean sort of shed warm or glasshouse warm. I don't mean by the radiator. And then they're ready to put in the ground, ready to make shoots in December. And then you can start harvesting in early May, really, if you like. If you like the little bantam egg-sized early potatoes with a little bit of butter, nothing finer, really. So that's a crop you can grow. So the two main crops I would suggest in the winter would be salads
and potatoes.
and early potatoes. And
And
critically, you want the crop to come out before your main summer crops, which are your tomatoes, your cucumbers, peppers, aubergines. You really want the ground free by early May to put any of those in.
yeah, What about the watering regime on salads in a polytunnel or greenhouse then for the winter? Because
Water them in and then forget about it.
so don't water them at all.
It's dripping every
Why
morning.
not? Like, is it because there's enough moisture in the air kind of to keep them happy?
And I've seen the odd person venting tunnels in the middle of winter. They seem to think you have to open the doors every day. Keep your doors shut to keep the heat in, and that keeps the water in. So it's just the atmosphere is very humid. Occasionally, I might open them just to dry it out a little bit so you don't get too much fungus disease on the leaves. But yeah, the soil doesn't dry out. The ones I sowed, well, the peppers and cucumbers came out beginning of this month. And on the same day, I had those out and had the salad sown by the evening and watered them then, and it's still dripping now. I might just give those a water in January if they've dried out at all, but I probably won't.
Okay. All right, a couple of other ones. Somebody's asking about, she's heard a lot about it. Sorry, it's Sam. He's heard a lot about the dangers of glyphosate. Are there safer alternatives, especially for those with limited mobility who can't always weed regularly? How do we best use them, and why are they safe for gardeners? I mean, I think we're going to disappoint Sam on this one because I don't think there are many alternatives to weeding for
No, well, there are in that glyphosate. There's more and more evidence that it has a horrific impact on biodiversity.
yeah.
It's some excellent research done at normal background environmental levels. It prevents bumblebee colonies from producing many offspring because for some reason they find it difficult to maintain temperature in their nests. And so there's absolutely no way I would use it, with our commitment to biodiversity here. So there's no such thing as organic weed killers, they don't exist. And so what you're down to is control. And obviously, person writing in and saying limited mobility, which makes manual control more difficult.
Yeah.
But you really shouldn't get a vegetable garden established unless you've dug out all things, the perennial weeds like scotch grass, thistles, dandelions, docks. So maybe get someone else to dig them out for you if you possibly can, or this is and/or you can cover the ground with perforated plastic. I used to recommend the use of silage cover. I don't anymore because a huge amount of microplastics come off that into the soil. But you can buy the perforated ground cover. Gardeners normally call it Mypex, but there's lots of different companies make it. And that is UV stabilized. It doesn't degenerate over the years, so there doesn't seem to be much plastic coming off it. And you can cover the ground with that for a year or so, and it will kill all the weeds under it. And you can grow crops through it. I mean, I grow all my pumpkins through that, and courgettes, and you can grow other crops if you like. And that keeps it's perforated, allows rain through and allows air exchange, but stops the weeds growing through it. So that's your only organic option apart from physical control, really.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is maybe I don't it may or may not be helpful, Sam, but the like a long handled hoe is a very easy tool to use, I think, on the back if you use it properly. So maybe that would be an option for you as well.
Yes.
Richard, we're up against the time wise, so maybe a couple of quick fire questions. How do I know if I need to use lime? That's from Robert. That's another thing you read about a lot in gardening books.
Yes. If you can bring yourself to do it, I would strongly suggest paying €20 for a soil test at an accredited lab, because although the back garden soil testing kits are universally rubbish. When I used to teach horticulture, I used to get students to do an exercise where we sent a sample off, and the students used one of this was an expensive one costing €150. Even really careful, good scientists or students got hopeless results all over the place. You can use a pH meter to check the soil pH, and if it's acidic, you need lime. But how much lime you need depends on the type of soil you have, and that requires laboratory answer. So if you really want to get a proper figure for the amount of lime you need, pay €20 and send it off to a lab and ask them.
Yeah. This feels like a safe space for a confession. I have never in 20 years of growing put lime on my soil, and I think I grow okay brassicas. Like why would you say it's needed if or am I just lucky that I have enough in the soil, or what's going on there?
Do you want the short answer or the long answer?
The short answer, because we only have 4 minutes and I still have 5 questions.
Okay, well, plants, soil life and plants growing in a living soil do best at a pH around 6.5, which is very, very slightly acidic. They grow less well outside there, but if you put loads of fertilizer down or loads of compost, you tend to mitigate those impacts.
Okay. Somebody's breeder said she bought a tray of purple sprouting broccoli plants, but the leaves have been destroyed. She can't see any signs of slugs.
Sounds like
gives?
either pigeons or caterpillars. A net would get a crop, say a net, and that'll keep caterpillars and pigeons off them.
Yeah. As on the caterpillars, Lucy said, did anyone find that there were very few caterpillars around this year?
I would genuinely not know, because all of my brassicas are under nets to keep them out.
Yeah. I would sort of feel there probably wasn't as many around this year. I can't prove that, but I'd maybe agree with that. Mike asks, it's probably a long answer to this, Richard, and you don't have time for, but maybe very quickly he asks pros and cons of no-dig gardening.
Excellent idea. Naturally, soil isn't really dug up unless a woolly mammoth came along or something. So yeah, if you don't need to break your soil up if it's nice and loose, so don't walk on it, and you can get away without digging. But to start it off, you need to get the soil nice and loose, and then it will stay that way if you look after it properly.
Yeah, good answer. Joan asks about transplanting asparagus to a new bed. It's planted 1 year. I don't know why she has to move it, but she obviously does have to move it. So.
She might have sown it in a seed bed, and then you normally put 2-year-old plants in, and I would usually move them March, April. Right. March, I'd put them in as they're starting to sprout.
Okay. We had asparagus kind of sprouted twice last year, we thought, because of climate change. Has that happened again this year?
Well, it's too early yet, really. I'm not, because things are carried on growing into the autumn, I've left the shoots on. In fact, a job for next week is to cut all the shoots, they're going yellow now, and see what happens. It's quite possible because it's been quite a strange autumn.
Okay. And Carol, I think this is the last question. Carol asked if the land grew huge leaves, but the fruit was small. So I don't know what veg or fruit she's talking about there, but generally speaking, too much leaf and not enough fruit. What caused that, do you think?
I've seen that actually with runner beans and things this year in a few people's gardens. It was a year, there were no cold checks in July, August, which tend to give things the idea to produce fruits like runner beans or so on. So it was a good year for vigorous green growth and not such a good year for fruiting, really, because of the mild and wet.
And then final one, Richard, is Fiona in the chat there. She says, is white vinegar okay to use around the patio as a weed killer? So I know some of the organic weed killers would be mainly
not
vinegar.
Organic weed killers. There's no legal requirement. You can sell anything you want as an organic weed killer. You can sell glyphosate as organic because it doesn't mean anything legally. It wouldn't do any harm on your patio. Don't get it anywhere near soil beds though, because it'll acidify the soil, and you really wouldn't need to apply lime if you're putting vinegar down on the soil.
Will it kill the weeds on the patio?
No, it burns them a little bit. We use a burner here, or fetch them out by hand.
Yeah, and I have a flame weeder at home as well, which I have to say, Fiona, is a great investment.
Well, you have a
for keeping
teenage
weeds.
boy who likes you. They love using flame weed as well.
He absolutely loves it. He feels like the Grim Reaper walking around,
Yeah, I had the same
blasting
when my
everything.
lad was that age. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it. I think we have got through more or less all the questions, I hope, and we've talked about our 2 topics. So well done us, Richard. Thanks a million, everyone, for joining us, and
Thank you.
hope to see you again at the end of next month, which will be probably our last session for the year, actually, because I don't think we're having one in December. So hard to believe the year is gone, almost gone on us already. So happy growing in the meantime. Get the garlic sown, and see you next month.
Bye bye.
All right. So